in me. The Lord is saying about King Cyrus that I'm going to use you. It actually says in Ezra chapter 1 that God anointed Cyrus for the task. He's saying, I'm going to use Cyrus to bring mercy, to bring blessing, even though Cyrus doesn't know me. It's the most radical story because, well, he's the king of Persia. If it was today, Persia is Iran. And of course, Babylon is Iraq. And Jerusalem is, you're clever, very good. Jerusalem is Jerusalem. Well, can you imagine how crazy it would be, as unlikely as it would be, for the current president of Iran to decide he wanted to bless the churches? Not only did he want to bless the churches, he also wanted to build their buildings for them and fund it. That's how crazy or how obscure it is for the kings of Persia in the Old Testament to bring favor to God's people. It was just as amazing. The Lord's saying, I'm going to use you even though you don't know me. That's exactly what God does. And not only does this King Cyrus tell the people of Israel that they can return to Jerusalem, but he also says every single person who chooses to go, he would give gold and silver and livestock. In other words, he would finance them to go back to Jerusalem. Not only that, he says that he would fund the rebuilding of the temple, the place where God's eye was on it and his heart was in it. And this Persian king, this foreign king, this anti-God king was going to be used to bring blessing, bring favor. So if God can do that in that time, why can't he do today? Bring favor from the most unlikely sources. I want to believe God with you to see favor from the most unlikely sources. Oftentimes, we think we know where God's going to bring blessing from, and it's amazing how often in life God can bring supernatural grace, supernatural favor from sources we never dreamed was possible. And do you know, not only did the first of those, King Cyrus, bring a decree ushering in a time when God's people could return to Jerusalem and say that he would fund it and fund the building of the temple. But that decree was continued by Darius, the next king, who in fact added to the decree even more blessing. And then after him, Artaxerxes, the third king of Cyrus, same thing. 3 different Persian kings brought favor to God's people. And it was an act of God. Never underestimate where God can bring blessing and where God can bring favor and bring deliverance, bring mercy into your world, give answers to prayer. He can use people who don't even realize that God is using them. In the first exile for God's people out of Egypt, remember, it was an evil Pharaoh who had a mad moment and decided to agree with Moses and to let God's people go. It was favor from the most unlikely source. In Joseph's time, he's in prison and God gives him the interpretation of dreams. And he interprets the dream of the Pharaoh or the king and finds himself getting favor from the most unlikely source, an Egyptian Pharaoh. It's the same with Daniel. In the Old Testament, it's the same with Jesus, who says in Luke 2:52, increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. But you know, it doesn't mean everyone loved him. God bringing favor from men doesn't mean everyone's going to love you. Matter of fact, often when you stand on the forefront for the purposes of God, there definitely won't be everybody loving you. But you don't need everyone to love you. You just need the right people. You just need God to decide to use who he wishes to use. And I pray that you may see favor from them as a church, Pastor Stovall. I pray you may see favor from the most unlikely sources, just supernatural favor. Let's believe for land and buildings and blessing and opportunity and promise. Do you know, many years ago when our church was it was already a growing, alive church. In fact, it was probably the biggest church in Australia, but we owned no buildings. We owned nothing, and we really didn't look like we could, naturally speaking, afford the kind of price the land was costing. And I mean, we needed a miracle. And at the time we got asked to move out of the building we were in, and we had nowhere to go. and a young person in our church rang a great big multinational company and said, look, our church is desperate, and asked if we could use their empty building right in the heart of our area, in the middle of our community. And this building, it was thousands and thousands of square feet, and he just rang up, and this big multinational company whose job is to make a profit for their shareholders gave our church that building for $1 a year. For 6 years, we had that building for $1 a year. It's incredible. Stovall, my wife and I, Bobby and I, we prayed about it. We decided to pay the rent all by ourselves. $1 a year. But they weren't church people. But they just represented favor from the most unlikely of sources. Just in recent times, one of our campuses, our city campus, it's crazy. We've been having 8 services in there. 2 on Saturday night. Then on Sunday, we were having services at 8, 9:30, 11:45, 3 p.m., 5 p.m., 7 p.m. And even then, every single service had more people than we should have had in the building. And we've had frustration after frustration trying to find the facilities to expand. We've had opposition, spiritual opposition, and natural opposition. And eventually it got to the point where we were going to the court. And in the Land and Environment Court, we're fighting for the permission to use another building. And now here's the amazing thing. A completely unchurched businessman agreed to pay half of the church's costs to fight that battle. Cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the weekend before I came away, we opened that brand new campus building that gives us room to expand and to grow. And it was favor from the most unlikely source. And if God can do it for us, why can't God do it for you in Jesus' name? Supernatural favor. Favor from the most unlikely and unexpected source. You know, don't look to people, because it's not just the kings of Persia that brought favor. It says our God extended mercy to us in the sight of the kings of Persia. In other words, you look to God, you look to people, you often get disappointed. But when you look to God, He can use the most unlikely, the most unimaginable people to bring answers to prayer, to bring a blessing, to bring opportunity. And I'm praying with you to see that season in your life. Are you excited about this today? In Jesus' name. Supernatural season of grace and favor. You know, when I first stepped out in preaching, my wife and I were traveling to little country towns in Australia. I used to clean shop front windows during the week and get enough to pay the rent, and then we'd go off and preach. And we'd really stepped out. I had a good job as a young person that I'd left behind, and we really stepped into this faith realm. And the week I made the decision to give up my job, just go out preaching, I had a big old Australian car, and we went around the corner, my wife and I, from our home, and went bang, straight into a little Japanese car. My big old Australian Holden car, it just sort of hardly had a mark on it, but the Japanese car went like a piano accordion. It just concertinaed. And so I find out that I had a cover note on my insurance for my car, but it had run out. In other words, I was uninsured. And we just stepped out, and I'll never forget, because this big multinational insurance company, the assessor comes around to talk to me, and I told him the whole story and told him the truth. And do you know, this insurance company, it paid out my insurance. Even though I really ultimately was uninsured, they paid out my insurance because I told them my story of stepping out and wanting to serve God. And it was just favor from the most unlikely source. I could tell you story after story, but I got my best points still to come. Hey, last thing I want to talk to you about, number 4, is a clear way forward. I pray God will give you a clear way forward. Vision, dreams, and insight. Listen to what the word says. Now for a little while, grace has been shown us from the Lord our God to leave us a remnant to escape, to give us a peg in His holy place. Listen, that our eyes may be enlightened. It speaks about enlightened eyes. I believe for God to enlighten your eyes, and that means your eyes become bright. Other translations say that our eyes may be brightened. I pray that God can brighten your eyes, because bright eyes represent hope. If you ever look into the face of a person who's feeling hopeless, you'll see an emptiness, a vacancy in their eyes. There's no life there. Their eyes are not bright. But when God gives you hope, all of a sudden your eyes become enlightened. You start looking through bright eyes, and bright eyes see things that hopelessness can't see. Bright eyes begin to see things that aren't even there yet, because you're looking through eyes of hope, and you're looking toward things that you believe and you trust for. And I pray in Jesus' name, God will give you a clear way forward where you will have insight. You know, you live out of hindsight, and it's a world of regret. It's a world of cynicism. It's a world of bad experience, hindsight. But when you live with foresight, you see things that aren't even there. When you live with insight, and this is what I want to encourage you to do. I want to encourage every person here.